Jasmine Taylor sits in a corner office overlooking Manhattan, signing papers that will reshape American aviation forever. 3 days earlier, Jasmine being violently dragged down the aisle of Flight 2237 by security, bleeding and humiliated. Her phone rings, the airline CEO is calling. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and accountability, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against discrimination, and subscribe to see more stories of people turning injustice into powerful change. Jasmine Taylor was not a woman who could be easily dismissed. At 37, the Detroit native had built a reputation that commanded respect in the cutthroat world of corporate finance. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood with parents who emphasized education as the path to opportunity, Jasmine had excelled from an early age. Her father, a postal worker, and mother, a nurse, had scraped together enough for her to attend good schools, where her natural aptitude for mathematics quickly set her apart. By 17, Jasmine had earned a full scholarship to MIT, where she graduated at the top of her class with a degree in financial engineering. Not content to stop there, she went on to earn her MBA from Wharton, distinguishing herself with innovative research on sustainable investment strategies in traditionally underperforming markets. Her career trajectory had been nothing short of meteoric. Starting at a prestigious consulting firm, Jasmine quickly made her mark by saving a manufacturing client from bankruptcy through a brilliant restructuring plan. Within 5 years, she was headhunted by Harrington Capital, one of the most influential investment firms in the country. Now, as their chief investment officer, she managed a portfolio worth over $30 billion, making her one of the most powerful black women in American finance. Jasmine doesn't just see numbers where others see numbers, Walter Hayes, the founder of Harrington Capital and Jasmine's mentor, often said. She sees patterns where others see chaos, opportunities where others see dead ends. Walter, now in his 70s with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had weathered multiple financial crises, had been grooming Jasmine as his successor. He recognized in her not just brilliance, but a rare combination of analytical precision and human understanding that made her judgments about investments unusually prescient. Her reputation as a kingmaker in corporate America was well earned. When Jasmine Taylor decided a company was worth Harrington's investment, others followed. When she passed, even promising ventures often struggled to find capital. Her ability to identify promising ventures had become almost legendary within financial circles, earning her both admiration and, inevitably, resentment. Balancing her professional success with personal life hadn't been without challenges. Divorced after a brief marriage in her 20s, Jasmine was now a dedicated single mother to 10-year-old Zoe, a precocious girl who shared her mother's love for mathematics and her determination. Jasmine had arranged her demanding schedule to ensure she never missed Zoe's math competitions or parent-teacher conferences, often reviewing investment prospectuses during the subway rides between work and school events. "My mother always says that excellence isn't negotiable," Zoe had once told her science teacher, with the seriousness only a 10-year-old could muster. "But kindness isn't either." That philosophy guided Jasmine through the often challenging terrain of being a black woman in spaces dominated by white men. She navigated boardrooms where she was frequently the only person of color, let alone the only black woman, with a graceful confidence that disarmed skeptics and commanded respect. She never shied away from addressing disparities when necessary but was strategic about picking her battles. "The corporate world wasn't built for people who look like me," she often mentored younger professionals of color. "But that doesn't mean we don't belong here. It means we have the opportunity to rebuild it better." Her presence at Harrington had already led to measurable changes. Under her influence, the firm had increased its investments in minority-owned businesses by 200% over 4 years, all while maintaining returns that kept shareholders more than satisfied. She had also spearheaded a successful internship program specifically targeting students from historically black colleges and universities. The morning of what would become the most notorious flight in recent aviation history began ordinarily enough. Jasmine was preparing for a critical business trip to Atlanta to finalize negotiations with Skyway Airlines, a major carrier seeking substantial investment to fund an ambitious expansion plan. The potential deal, worth approximately $1 billion, would not only transform Skyway's position in the market but would represent one of Harrington Capital's largest investments of the year. "Are you bringing me back peaches?" Zoe asked over breakfast, referencing their inside joke about Georgia's famous fruit. "The biggest, sweetest one I can find," Jasmine promised, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "It's just an overnight trip. I'll be back tomorrow evening in time for dinner and your science presentation. And you'll wear your lucky earrings." Zoe pointed to the simple pearl studs Jasmine always wore for important negotiations, a gift from her own mother when she graduated from MIT. "Always," Jasmine smiled, touching one earring lightly. "They haven't failed me yet." She had no way of knowing that within hours, those earrings would be spattered with her own blood on the floor of a Skyway Airlines plane, or that this routine business trip would catalyze a reckoning that would reshape an entire industry. Jasmine arrived at LaGuardia Airport 2 hours before her scheduled departure, as was her habit. Efficiency was second nature to her, evidenced by her carefully packed carry-on containing exactly what she needed for the overnight business trip: one change of professional attire, her laptop, essential toiletries, and a comprehensive brief on Skyway Airlines prepared by her team. She checked in online and proceeded directly to security, where she moved through the TSA checkpoint with practiced ease, despite the additional, random, screening she had come to expect as a black traveler. At the gate, Jasmine reviewed her notes one final time, highlighting key points for tomorrow's negotiation. When boarding was announced for first-class passengers, she gathered her belongings and joined the line, boarding pass displayed on her phone. The gate agent scanned her ticket with a smile and wished her a pleasant flight. The first hint of trouble came as she stepped onto the aircraft. The flight attendant stationed at the entrance, a blonde woman whose name tag read Heather Miller, glanced at Jasmine and then pointedly looked past her, as if expecting the real, first-class passenger to appear. "Excuse me," Heather said, her voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "This is the first-class boarding call." Jasmine nodded politely. "Yes, I'm aware. I have a first-class ticket." She displayed her boarding pass again, the screen clearly showing her seat assignment, 2A. Heather's eyes narrowed slightly as she examined the screen. "May I see your ID as well?" Though it was unusual to be asked for identification after already passing through security and having her boarding pass scanned, Jasmine complied without comment, producing her driver's license from her purse. Heather studied it with unusual scrutiny, looking back and forth between the ID and Jasmine's face multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, her voice calm but firm. "No problem," Heather finally replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Taylor." The slight pause before her surname did not go unnoticed by Jasmine, who had experienced enough microaggressions in her professional life to recognize one when it occurred. Still, she moved past Heather and made her way to her seat, stowing her carry-on in the overhead bin before settling in by the window. She had just opened her email when Heather appeared beside her seat. "Excuse me, but I need to verify your boarding pass again," she announced, loud enough that nearby passengers turned to look. Jasmine felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the tension that came with being singled out, with having her presence questioned in spaces where people like her were underrepresented. Nevertheless, she unlocked her phone and displayed her boarding pass once more. "This is definitely seat 2A, she confirmed. "Is there some confusion?" Heather's mouth tightened. "It's just unusual for our system to have issues like this. I need to make sure you're in the correct seat." A white businessman across the aisle, who had boarded without any additional verification, was now watching the interaction with growing discomfort. Behind him, another passenger, a younger man with glasses who would later be identified as Brian Walters, had discreetly begun recording on his phone. "I assure you, I'm in the correct seat," Jasmine replied, maintaining her composure. "If there's a system issue, perhaps you should check with the gate agent who scanned my boarding pass." Instead of acknowledging this reasonable suggestion, Heather turned away and walked briskly to the front of the plane, where she engaged in a hushed conversation with the captain, occasionally glancing back at Jasmine. Moments later, both approached her seat. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Andrew Reynolds," the pilot introduced himself, his tone authoritative. "There seems to be some confusion about your seating assignment." "There's no confusion on my part, Captain," Jasmine responded, displaying her boarding pass for the third time. "I have a confirmed reservation for seat 2A on this flight." Captain Reynolds barely glanced at the screen. "Our system is showing a discrepancy, and we need to resolve this before takeoff. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable waiting in the terminal while we sort this out." The suggestion was clear. "Leave voluntarily or be removed." Jasmine felt a surge of indignation but kept her voice measured. "I've shown my boarding pass multiple times, Captain. It clearly assigns me to this seat. I have an important business meeting in Atlanta tomorrow morning, and I need to be on this flight. If there's a system error, that's not my responsibility to resolve." By now, several passengers were openly watching the confrontation. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he interjected, "I couldn't help overhearing. Is there really a problem here? The lady has shown her boarding pass multiple times." Captain Reynolds turned to the man with a reassuring smile. "Sir, we're handling a security matter. Please stay out of it." The characterization of the situation as a security matter shifted the atmosphere in the cabin immediately. Jasmine felt her heart rate accelerate as she recognized the dangerous territory this misunderstanding was entering. "This is not a security matter," she stated firmly. "This appears to be a case of racial profiling, and I would like to speak with your supervisor immediately." At the mention of racial profiling, Heather's face flushed. "That is absolutely not what's happening here. You're being disruptive and threatening." "I have not raised my voice or made any threats," Jasmine responded, acutely aware that remaining calm was now not just a matter of professionalism but potentially of personal safety. Captain Reynolds gestured toward the front of the plane. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to deplane now, or I'll be forced to call security." "On what grounds?" Jasmine asked, but the captain had already turned away, nodding to Heather, who was speaking into a phone. Less than 5 minutes later, 2 security officers, later identified as Raymond Phillips and Derek Johnson, boarded the aircraft. Without attempting to understand the situation or speaking to Jasmine directly, they approached her seat. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the taller officer, Phillips, stated. Jasmine took a deep breath. "I have a valid ticket for this seat. I've broken no rules. I will not leave this plane voluntarily under these circumstances." What happened next would be viewed millions of times across social media platforms within hours. Officer Phillips grabbed Jasmine's arm, yanking her from her seat with such force that her head struck the overhead bin. As she instinctively resisted, Officer Johnson seized her other arm, and together they began dragging her down the aisle toward the exit. "I have a right to be on this flight," Jasmine called out, her voice steady despite the violence being inflicted on her body. "This is discrimination." Several passengers looked away, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Others called out in protest. Brian Walters continued filming, documenting as the officers dragged Jasmine's body down the narrow aisle, her legs scraping against seat edges, her blazer tearing at the shoulder. At the aircraft door, Jasmine's lip struck the metal frame as the officers maneuvered her through the exit, drawing blood. They continued dragging her through the jet bridge and into the terminal, where they finally released her, leaving her crumpled on the floor, her white blouse stained crimson from her bleeding lip, her wrists bruised from their grip, and her dignity shattered before a terminal full of shocked onlookers. As she struggled to her feet, Jasmine caught a glimpse through the terminal window of Flight 2237 pushing back from the gate, carrying on to Atlanta without her. But with her professional reputation, physical well-being, and sense of security left behind, broken on the terminal floor. The sterile lights of the airport medical center cast harsh shadows across Jasmine's face as a concerned nurse gently cleaned the blood from her split lip. The physical pain, though significant, paled in comparison to the humiliation and violation she felt. Her hands trembled slightly as she held an ice pack to her swollen wrists, the bruises already darkening against her brown skin. "You should consider going to a hospital for a more thorough examination," the nurse advised, her eyes reflecting genuine concern. "You may have injuries we can't detect here." Jasmine nodded absently, her mind racing through the professional implications of what had just occurred. The billion-dollar deal with Skyway that was supposed to be finalized tomorrow. The executives expecting her arrival. The presentation she had meticulously prepared. "Miss Taylor?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. A young man in a Skyway Airlines uniform stood in the doorway, his expression carefully composed into what appeared to be a practiced look of professional concern. His name badge identified him as Gregory Mitchell, customer service representative. "Ms. Taylor, I'm here on behalf of Skyway Airlines to extend our sincere apologies for the unfortunate incident on board Flight 2237. He produced an envelope from his jacket pocket. "The airline would like to offer you this travel voucher for a future flight, valued at $500, as a gesture of goodwill." Jasmine stared at the envelope without reaching for it, the absurdity of the offering striking her with its inadequacy. $500 for being physically assaulted, publicly humiliated, and potentially derailed in a billion-dollar business negotiation. "Mr. Mitchell," she said finally, her voice steady despite the throbbing pain in her lip, "please inform your superiors that I will not be accepting that voucher, nor will I be discussing this incident further without my attorney present." Gregory's professional smile faltered. "Ms. Taylor, we're just trying to resolve this situation amicably." "This situation," Jasmine interrupted, "involved me being physically dragged from an aircraft despite having a valid ticket, resulting in bodily harm and significant professional consequences. There is nothing amicable about it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls." As Gregory retreated with the rejected voucher, Jasmine reached for her phone, noticing several notifications already flooding the screen. A text from a colleague read, "Are you okay? There's a video going viral." Attached was a link to a Twitter post that already had thousands of retweets. Brian Walters, the passenger who had filmed the incident, had posted the video with the caption, "Black woman with valid first-class ticket just dragged off at Skyway Air flight for no reason. This is what racism looks like." Hashtag Justice for Jasmine, the hashtag was already trending. With hands that had steadied somewhat, Jasmine dialed the first of several critical calls. "Keisha. It's Jasmine Taylor. I need your legal counsel immediately." Keisha Washington had been Jasmine's attorney for years, a brilliant Harvard Law graduate with specific expertise in civil rights cases. "I've already seen the video," Keisha responded without preamble. "It's everywhere. Are you injured? Where are you now?" After briefing Keisha on her physical condition and location, Jasmine made her second call to Walter Hayes. "Walter, something's happened." She described the incident in precise detail, her analytical mind already separating emotion from fact as she recounted the events. There was a long pause before Walter responded, his voice heavy with concern and barely contained anger. "Jasmine, come home immediately. We'll reschedule the Skyway meeting." "That's just it, Walter," Jasmine replied. "The company that just had me dragged off their plane is the same one we're considering for a billion-dollar investment." Another weighted silence filled the line. "This complicates things," Walter finally said. "How do you want to handle it?" "I'm not sure yet. But I know I'm not letting this go." Her final call was the hardest, to her daughter's caretaker, explaining that she would be delayed returning home and asking that Zoe be told only that Mommy had to change her travel plans. By the time Jasmine left the medical center, the video had exploded across all social media platforms. Hashtag Justice for Jasmine was the #1 trending topic nationally, with hashtag Boycott Skyway quickly rising behind it. News outlets were picking up the story, with coverage ranging from sympathetic outrage to thinly veiled suggestions that there must be another side to the story. CNN ran with the headline, "Investment Executive Forcibly Removed from Flight, Raises Questions of Racial Bias in Airlines." Fox News, meanwhile, opted for "Disruptive Passenger Removed from Skyway Flight, Company Cites Security Protocols." Skyway Airlines CEO, Frank Daniels, issued a hastily prepared statement that only fueled the growing outrage. Skyway Airlines regrets that standard security procedures resulted in a passenger experiencing discomfort. "We are reviewing the incident but maintain that our staff acted in accordance with established protocols to ensure the safety of all passengers." The statement made no acknowledgement of Jasmine's injuries, the validity of her ticket, or the racial dynamics at play. The public response was swift and merciless, with Skyway's social media accounts flooded with comments and their customer service lines overwhelmed. As media requests poured in, Jasmine maintained her silence, ignoring calls from major networks and declining all interview requests. Instead, she checked into a hotel near the airport, requested a late checkout for the following day, and began methodically planning her response. In her hotel room, Jasmine carefully documented her injuries with photographs, preserved the torn blazer and blood-stained blouse as evidence, and wrote a detailed account of the incident while it was still fresh in her memory. Then she opened her laptop and began researching Skyway Airlines' corporate structure, leadership team, and history of similar incidents. What she found was illuminating. Skyway had faced 3 discrimination lawsuits in the past 5 years, all settled quietly out of court. Their executive leadership team of 15 people included just one person of color, a South Asian man, and no black executives. Their board of directors was entirely white and predominantly male. As she dug deeper, Jasmine uncovered a pattern of customer complaints regarding discriminatory treatment, particularly from Black and Middle Eastern passengers, that had been largely ignored by management. Employee reviews on job sites revealed a corporate culture that many described as hostile or exclusionary toward minorities. Just as she was compiling these findings into a document, her phone rang with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Ms. Taylor," came a voice she didn't recognize. "This is Frank Daniels, CEO of Skyway Airlines." Jasmine's grip tightened on the phone. "Mr. Daniels. I wanted to personally express my regret over today's unfortunate incident and assure you that Skyway takes customer experience very seriously." "Do you also take assault seriously, Mr. Daniels?" "Because that's what happened today. Your employees had me physically attacked for the crime of sitting in a seat I paid for." There was a pause before Daniels continued, his tone noticeably cooler. "Ms. Taylor, I understand you're upset, but characterizing the enforcement of airline security protocols as assault is both inaccurate and potentially defamatory. That said, we're prepared to offer a generous settlement to put this matter behind us quickly and amicably." "What is your definition of generous, Mr. Daniels?" $50,000, contingent upon a non-disclosure agreement, of course." Jasmine almost laughed at the insulting figure. "Mr. Daniels, your company is currently seeking $1 billion investment from my firm. Do you really think $50,000 is adequate compensation for what happened today?" Another pause, longer this time. "You're with Harrington Capital." "I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Harrington Capital," Jasmine corrected. "And I was on my way to Atlanta to discuss your expansion proposal when your employees decided I didn't belong in first class." The silence that followed told Jasmine everything she needed to know about how Daniels was recalculating the situation. "Perhaps we should discuss this further once you've had time to rest, Ms. Taylor," he finally said, his tone suddenly solicitous. "I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies everyone." "I'm sure we can, Mr. Daniels," Jasmine replied coolly. "But it won't be the one you're imagining. Good night." As she ended the call, Jasmine looked out the hotel window at the twinkling lights of the airport runways in the distance. For the first time since being dragged from the plane, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose crystallizing within her. This wasn't just about her personally anymore. This was about power, accountability, and the opportunity to force meaningful change in an industry that had consistently failed to address its systemic biases. She would not be accepting any settlements. She would not be signing any non-disclosure agreements. And she most certainly would not be letting Skyway Airlines off the hook. Morning light filtered through the hotel room curtains as Jasmine reviewed her notes one final time before her meeting with Keisha Washington. Her split lip had swollen overnight, and the bruises on her wrists had darkened to a deep purple, visual reminders of yesterday's violence that no amount of concealer could fully hide. A knock at the door announced Keisha's arrival. The attorney entered with purpose, her tailored pantsuit and leather briefcase projecting the same confident professionalism that had made her one of New York's most respected civil rights lawyers. "First things first," Keisha said after a brief embrace, her eyes taking in Jasmine's visible injuries with a flash of controlled anger. "How are you really doing? Physically or emotionally?" Jasmine asked with a wry smile that quickly turned to a wince as it pulled at her injured lip. "Both. Physically, I've had better days. Emotionally." Jasmine paused, considering. "I'm angry, Keisha. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever experienced something like this without having the resources or platform to fight back." Keisha nodded, unpacking her laptop and several folders onto the hotel room's desk. "That anger is justified. And we can use it. But first, let's talk legal strategy." For the next hour, they discussed potential courses of action. A civil lawsuit against Skyway Airlines for assault, battery, false imprisonment, negligence, and civil rights violations was the obvious starting point. The viral video provided compelling evidence, and Jasmine's detailed documentation of her injuries strengthened their case considerably. "Based on similar cases and the egregiousness of what happened, we could reasonably seek 7 figures in damages," Keisha explained. "The video makes this nearly indefensible for them." Jasmine listened attentively, but her mind was already moving beyond the lawsuit itself to the broader strategic implications. "There's something else we need to discuss," she said once Keisha had outlined the legal approach. "Harrington Capital is currently in negotiations with Skyway for a potential billion-dollar investment deal." Keisha's eyebrows rose. "That significantly changes the dynamics at play." "Exactly. This isn't just about seeking damages for what happened to me personally. This is about leveraging financial power to force institutional change." Jasmine opened her laptop and turned it toward Keisha, displaying the research she'd compiled overnight on Skyway's corporate culture and history of discrimination incidents. What happened yesterday wasn't an isolated incident. It's symptomatic of systemic issues within their corporate structure and culture, Jasmine explained. And it's not unique to Skyway. The entire aviation industry has a problematic history with racial discrimination. As they discussed the implications, Jasmine's phone rang. Walter Hayes's name flashed on the screen. "Jasmine, how are you holding up?" Walter asked, his concern evident even through the phone line. "I'm strategizing with Keisha Washington now," she replied. "Walter, this goes beyond my personal experience. Skyway has a pattern of discriminatory practices that makes them a problematic investment target regardless of yesterday's events." Walter sighed heavily. "I understand your position, and personally, I'm outraged by how you were treated. But from a business perspective, we need to consider the implications of letting this incident affect a billion-dollar deal that our shareholders are expecting. What if we could accomplish both objectives?" Jasmine proposed. "Use this situation to not only secure the investment on more favorable terms but also force meaningful changes in Skyway's corporate policies and culture." "That's an ambitious goal, Jasmine. The cleanest approach might be to settle your personal claim quietly and proceed with the investment as planned." Jasmine felt a flash of disappointment. Walter had always been her champion within Harrington, but his caution in this moment reminded her that even allies sometimes fail to fully grasp the importance of standing firm against discrimination. "With respect, Walter, I disagree. Settling quietly would send the message that this kind of treatment is acceptable as long as the company is willing to pay for it afterward. That's not the kind of investor Harrington should be. There was a long pause before Walter responded. You've never steered us wrong before. What exactly are you proposing? After ending the call with Walter, who had reluctantly agreed to support her approach provided she could demonstrate its financial viability, Jasmine turned back to her research. She spent the afternoon reviewing Harrington Capital's extensive investment portfolio, identifying multiple connections to the aviation industry that could be leveraged in this situation. Harrington held significant positions in two of Skyway's competitors, as well as several companies in their supply chain. The firm also managed investments for three of the pension funds that held substantial Skyway stock. These connections provided potential pressure points beyond the direct investment negotiations. As evening approached, Jasmine's phone rang again, Frank Daniels calling for the second time. Ms. Taylor, he began, his tone noticeably more conciliatory than during their previous conversation. I've had time to review the incident more thoroughly, and I want to assure you that Skyway takes this matter very seriously. We're prepared to offer a settlement of $250,000, along with first-class travel privileges for life. The increased offer confirmed what Jasmine already suspected: Skyway was panicking about the potential impact on their investment deal. Mr. Daniels, she replied calmly, I'm not interested in monetary compensation or travel perks. What I'm interested in is accountability and structural change within your organization. Structural change. Daniels repeated, confusion evident in his voice. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for. Then let me be clear. Skyway Airlines has a documented history of discriminatory practices that goes far beyond my individual experience. Before Harrington Capital would consider moving forward with any investment, we would require comprehensive reforms to your corporate policies, diversity initiatives, training programs, and executive structure. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Daniels finally spoke, his voice had lost its conciliatory tone. Ms. Taylor, while we value Harrington Capital's potential investment, we don't appreciate outsiders dictating how we run our company. Perhaps we should be discussing these matters with Mr. Hayes directly. By all means, call Walter, Jasmine replied evenly. But you should know that he fully supports my position on this. And just to be clear, Mr. Daniels, this isn't about dictating how you run your company. It's about ensuring that Harrington's capital isn't used to perpetuate discriminatory practices. The choice is entirely yours. After ending the call, Jasmine sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes. Then she picked up her phone again and began making calls to her network of black executives across various industries. By midnight, she had spoken with 12 influential business leaders who had agreed to form a coalition supporting her efforts to hold Skyway accountable. Have you ever faced discrimination while traveling? Comment number 1 if you've experienced or witnessed racial profiling on a flight. Comment number 2 if you believe companies should face financial consequences for discriminatory actions. Hit that like button if you think Jasmine is right to stand firm against settling quietly, and subscribe to see more stories of people fighting systemic injustice. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Would you use your financial power to force change, or would you take the settlement and move on? Let's see how Jasmine navigates this corporate battlefield in the next part of our story. The familiar hustle of Manhattan's financial district greeted Jasmine as her car pulled up to Harrington Capital's headquarters the following morning. The imposing glass tower reflected the early sunlight, a physical manifestation of the power and influence housed within its walls. Normally, Jasmine would stride through the revolving doors with the confident anonymity of someone who belonged there despite being one of the few black executives in the building. Today, however, was different. A small group of reporters had gathered at the entrance, alerted to her return by sources unknown. Camera flashes erupted as she emerged from the car, her bruised face and split lip now visible evidence of the incident that had captivated social media. Ms. Taylor. Can you comment on the Skyway Airlines incident? Is Harrington Capital still considering investing in Skyway? Have you spoken with the airline CEO? Jasmine moved past them with a polite but firm "no comment at this time," her security team creating a path through the crowd. Inside, the lobby fell into an unusual hush as employees recognized her, their expressions a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and discomfort. Jasmine maintained her composure, nodding acknowledgments to those who met her eyes as she made her way to the executive elevator. Walter Hayes was waiting in her office, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. He turned as she entered, his face registering shock at her visible injuries before he carefully composed his expression. "An emergency board meeting has been called for 10 o'clock, he informed her without preamble. "Thomas Whitfield is leading the charge." Jasmine set her briefcase on her desk with deliberate calm. Thomas Whitfield was Harrington's most conservative board member, a Wall Street veteran who had frequently opposed her more progressive investment strategies, though he couldn't argue with her consistent results. "Let me guess, he's concerned about the potential impact on the Skyway deal." Walter nodded. "He's framing it as a matter of fiduciary responsibility. Arguing that your personal experience, however unfortunate, shouldn't interfere with a sound investment opportunity." "And what's your position, Walter?" Jasmine asked directly. The older man sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Professionally, I understand his concerns. Personally," he gestured toward her injured face, "I'm having a hard time separating business from what was clearly an injustice." Before Jasmine could respond, her assistant knocked and entered. "Ms. Taylor, the board is assembling in the main conference room. They've requested your presence 15 minutes early for a private conversation." Jasmine exchanged a glance with Walter. "Divide and conquer." "So it would seem," he agreed. "How do you want to play this?" "Straight down the middle," Jasmine replied, gathering the files she'd prepared. "With facts, figures, and a strategy they can't refute on financial grounds alone." The private conversation turned out to be exactly what Jasmine had anticipated. Thomas Whitfield, flanked by two other board members who typically aligned with his positions, was waiting when she entered the conference room. "Jasmine," he began, his tone a carefully calibrated mixture of concern and authority. "First, let me say how disturbed we all are by what happened to you. Completely unacceptable." "Thank you, Thomas," Jasmine replied, taking a seat across from him. "I appreciate that. That said," he continued, leaning forward, "we need to discuss the Skyway situation with clear heads. This investment represents a significant opportunity for Harrington, one we've been developing for months. The potential returns are exceptional." "I'm well aware of the financial projections," Jasmine said. "I developed them." Whitfield nodded. "Exactly why we're confused by your apparent willingness to jeopardize the deal over a personal matter, however distressing." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "If you've characterized my position as simply emotional reaction, then you've misunderstood it. My concerns about Skyway are fundamentally financial." "Financial?" Whitfield repeated skeptically. "Yes. A company with Skyway's documented pattern of discrimination and their response to this incident demonstrates serious deficiencies in risk management, corporate governance, and leadership quality. These are material factors that negatively impact their long-term value proposition and make them a questionable investment target regardless of their current market position." Before Whitfield could respond, the conference room doors opened as the remaining board members began filing in. The formal meeting was about to begin. For the next hour, Jasmine presented a comprehensive analysis of Skyway Airlines that went far beyond the personal incident. She detailed the company's history of discrimination complaints, their inadequate diversity initiatives compared to industry peers, and the potential financial risks associated with their corporate culture problems. She identified specific metrics where Skyway underperformed relative to competitors with stronger diversity and inclusion practices. "The data is clear," she concluded. "Companies with diverse leadership teams and inclusive cultures consistently outperform their less diverse counterparts over time. Skyway's deficiencies in this area represent not just an ethical concern, but a material financial risk to our investment." Then she pivoted to her proposed solution, using Harrington's position as a potential major investor to require specific governance and policy changes at Skyway as a condition of the investment. Rather than walking away entirely, we have an opportunity to transform Skyway into a better company, both ethically and financially. By requiring these changes, we're not just making a statement about values, we're enhancing the long-term value of our potential investment. Her proposal included mandatory diversity targets for Skyway's executive team and board, comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing employees, transparent reporting of discrimination incidents, and the creation of a chief diversity officer position reporting directly to the CEO. When she finished, Walter was the first to speak. "I've reviewed Jasmine's analysis in detail, and I find her approach both principled and financially sound. This isn't about retribution for a personal slight. It's about addressing material deficiencies in a potential investment target." Thomas Whitfield remained unconvinced. "While I appreciate the thoroughness of the analysis, I'm concerned that we're overstepping our role as investors. We provide capital, we don't dictate operational decisions." "With respect, Thomas," Jasmine countered, "major investors influence corporate policy all the time. When we see problems that threaten shareholder value, we have not just a right but a responsibility to address them." The debate continued for another hour, with various board members weighing in. Some supported Jasmine's approach entirely, others expressed reservations about specific aspects. Throughout, Jasmine maintained her composure, responding to each concern with data-driven arguments rather than emotional appeals. Finally, Walter called for a vote. The result: 9 in favor of Jasmine's approach, with 3 opposed. "It's settled then," Walter announced. "Harrington Capital will proceed with the Skyway negotiations under the conditions Jasmine has outlined. If they refuse to implement these changes, we withdraw our offer and explore investments with their competitors instead." As the board members filed out, Walter and Jasmine remained behind. "That was masterfully handled," Walter told her. "You transformed a personal injury into a corporate strategy without once making it about yourself." "Because it isn't just about me," Jasmine replied. "What happened to me was a symptom of systemic problems that affect Skyway's value as a company. Addressing those problems isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart investment move." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Frank Daniels called me directly this morning, you know. Tried to go around you. And I told him that Harrington speaks with one voice on this matter, and that voice is yours." Walter smiled slightly. He didn't take it well. Indeed, as they left the conference room, Jasmine's assistant informed her that Frank Daniels had issued a public statement just minutes earlier. Pulling it up on her phone, Jasmine read it aloud to Walter. "Skyway Airlines regrets the unfortunate misunderstanding involving Ms. Jasmine Taylor. While we maintain that our employees followed established security protocols, we acknowledge that the situation could have been handled with greater sensitivity. We look forward to continuing our investment discussions with Harrington Capital and addressing any concerns they may have." "Unfortunate misunderstanding," Walter repeated incredulously. "That's how he characterizes having you physically dragged off a plane." "It's exactly the kind of dismissive response I expected," Jasmine replied, her resolve hardening. "Now we escalate." That afternoon, Jasmine convened a virtual meeting with the coalition of Black executives she'd contacted the previous night. The group now included 15 influential leaders across finance, technology, and media, all committed to supporting her effort to hold Skyway accountable. "What happened to me could have happened to any of us," she told them. "In fact, similar incidents have happened to many people who lack our platforms and resources. This is an opportunity to use our collective influence to force meaningful change." Each executive agreed to leverage their own connections to apply pressure on Skyway from multiple angles. Those with media relationships would ensure the story remained in the news cycle. Those with investment influence would raise questions about Skyway's practices with their financial analysts. Those with corporate board positions would discuss the incident as a cautionary tale of reputational risk. As the virtual meeting concluded, Jasmine received an alert that the video of her removal from the plane had surpassed 10 million views across platforms. Public sentiment was overwhelmingly supportive, with hashtag Boycott Skyway now trending nationally alongside hashtag Justice for Jasmine. The court of public opinion has rendered its verdict, one of the coalition members observed. Now we need to make sure there are actual consequences. Jasmine nodded in agreement. Skyway Airlines is about to learn an expensive lesson about the true cost of discrimination. 3 days after the incident, Jasmine sat in the understated green room of the National Urban Affairs Program, one of the most respected news shows focusing on issues affecting communities of color. After declining dozens of interview requests from outlets ranging from morning talk shows to late-night comedy programs, she had agreed to a single in-depth conversation with journalist Amara Jackson, known for her incisive but fair reporting. "We're on in 5 ms. Taylor, a production assistant, informed her as a makeup artist made final touches, carefully working around her still-healing lip. Jasmine had chosen this forum deliberately. Rather than seeking the widest possible audience or the most sympathetic interviewer, she had selected a platform that would allow for nuanced discussion of the systemic issues underlying her personal experience. As the cameras began rolling, Amara Jackson opened with a straightforward question, "Ms. Taylor, the video of you being forcibly removed from a Skyway Airlines flight has now been viewed over 20 million times. Can you take us through what happened that day?" With measured precision, Jasmine recounted the events, emphasizing the routine nature of her actions prior to being questioned, the multiple verifications of her ticket, and the escalation that occurred despite her calm compliance. "At no point was I disruptive, threatening, or non-compliant with any legitimate request," she explained. "My presence in that first-class seat was questioned simply because I didn't fit someone's preconception of who belongs there." Skyway Airlines has characterized the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding and stated that their employees were following security protocols, Amara noted. "How do you respond to that?" "I'd be interested to know which protocol calls for dragging a paying passenger down an airplane aisle for sitting in their assigned seat," Jasmine replied. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a clear case of racial profiling that the airline is now attempting to minimize rather than address honestly." Rather than focusing solely on her personal experience, Jasmine skillfully broadened the conversation to address the systemic nature of discrimination in the transportation industry and corporate America more broadly. "What happened to me was not an isolated incident," she explained. "It's part of a pattern that affects people of color daily, though most cases don't go viral. As business leaders, we have a responsibility to recognize these patterns and use our influence to disrupt them." When asked about her role at Harrington Capital and the potential investment in Skyway, Jasmine was candid without revealing confidential details. "Investment firms like Harrington have significant power to influence corporate behavior through our allocation of capital," she noted. "We have a responsibility to ensure that we're not financing discriminatory practices, not just because it's morally right, but because companies with problematic cultures represent poor long-term investments." The interview, which lasted 30 minutes, struck a balance between Jasmine's personal story and the broader implications for corporate accountability. She came across as thoughtful, measured, and focused on constructive solutions rather than retribution, a stark contrast to the angry black woman stereotype that media outlets often defaulted to. By the time the interview aired that evening, Skyway Airlines stock had already dropped 7% since the incident, representing hundreds of millions in lost market value. The hashtag Boycott Skyway had evolved into a movement, with travelers publicly canceling reservations and corporate clients reconsidering their contracts. Frank Daniels, increasingly desperate to contain the damage, authorized a second public statement that offered a more explicit apology and announced a comprehensive review of the company's training procedures. However, the statement still characterized the incident as an isolated event, rather than acknowledging any systemic issues. The following day, Heather Miller, the flight attendant who had initially questioned Jasmine's presence in first class, gave an exclusive interview to a conservative news outlet. "I felt threatened by her demeanor," Heather claimed, despite video evidence showing Jasmine's composed responses throughout the interaction. This had nothing to do with race. It was about passenger safety and following procedures. When pressed for specifics about which procedures Jasmine had violated, Heather's answers became vague and contradictory. The interview, intended to present the airline employee's perspective, instead highlighted the inconsistencies in Skyway's position. Captain Andrew Reynolds similarly defended his actions in a written statement, insisting he had followed protocol in a situation he perceived as potentially disruptive. However, when journalists requested copies of these protocols from Skyway, the airline declined to provide them, citing security considerations. Further undermining Skyway's position, the airline claimed that security camera footage from the jet bridge and terminal, which would have captured additional angles of Jasmine's forcible removal, had been automatically overwritten according to standard data retention policies. This convenient disappearance of evidence only intensified public skepticism about the airline's commitment to transparency. Brian Walters, the passenger who had filmed the incident, found himself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. A 29-year-old software engineer who had been traveling to Atlanta for a job interview, Brian faced backlash from some quarters for his role in publicizing the incident. Online trolls accused him of selectively editing the video, despite its continuous footage, and questioned his motives. "I just recorded what I saw happening because it was clearly wrong," Brian explained in a brief statement posted to his Twitter account. "Anyone in that situation deserves to have witnesses." The harassment escalated when his personal information was doxed on several forums, leading to threatening messages and calls to his employer demanding his termination for stirring up racial division. When Jasmine learned of Brian's situation, she reached out privately. "I want to thank you for having the courage to document what happened," she told him during their phone conversation. Not everyone would have taken that risk. Learning that the online harassment had cost Brian a promising job opportunity when the prospective employer became concerned about the controversy, Jasmine leveraged her network to connect him with several technology companies known for their progressive values. Within a week, Brian had 3 interview offers from firms that respected his ethical stand rather than punishing him for it. As the media storm continued to swirl, various stakeholders began taking sides. The Flight Attendants Union issued a carefully worded statement supporting their members while acknowledging the need for improved training. "While we stand by our members' right to ensure cabin safety, we recognize the importance of addressing unconscious bias in customer interactions. We are committed to being part of the solution." Civil rights organizations called for a Department of Transportation investigation into Skyway's practices, citing statistics showing that the airline had a disproportionately high rate of removing passengers of color compared to industry averages. Corporate clients began publicly re-evaluating their relationships with Skyway. A major technology company announced it was reviewing its corporate travel policies in light of recent events, while a prominent consulting firm explicitly redirected its business to competitors until Skyway demonstrates meaningful changes. Throughout this period, Jasmine maintained a strategic presence, visible enough to keep pressure on Skyway but focused on systemic solutions rather than personal vindication. Her single interview with Amara Jackson was shared widely across platforms, particularly her articulation of how discrimination represented both a moral and financial liability for companies. 10 days after the incident, with Skyway's stock down nearly 15% and bookings reported to be significantly below projections, Jasmine received another call from Frank Daniels. Ms. Taylor, he began, his tone noticeably less confident than in their previous conversations, "Our board has requested a meeting with Harrington Capital to discuss the potential investment and other matters related to recent events." "I'd be happy to arrange that, Mr. Daniels," Jasmine replied evenly. "Would tomorrow morning at Harrington's offices be convenient?" The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of a billion-dollar deal, but potentially the future direction of an entire industry's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Harrington Capital boardroom exuded quiet power through its understated elegance. Walnut paneling lined the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan, and the massive conference table gleamed under recessed lighting. It was a room designed to impress without ostentation, to signal authority through confidence rather than intimidation. Jasmine had deliberately arrived 30 minutes early to review her strategy with Walter and their legal team. She wore a tailored navy suit that projected professionalism while the high collar partially concealed her still-healing injuries. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, pearl earrings, her lucky ones, caught the light as she reviewed her notes one final time. "They're here," her assistant announced, and moments later, Frank Daniels entered, flanked by Skyway's chief legal officer Patricia Morrison and two board members. Daniels had the haggard look of someone who hadn't slept properly in days, his usual confidence replaced by a wary defensiveness. "Thank you for meeting with us," he began after introductions were complete. "We appreciate the opportunity to discuss our potential partnership in person." Jasmine nodded. "Before we begin, I want to clarify the parameters of today's conversation. We're here to discuss two distinct but related matters. The potential billion-dollar investment by Harrington Capital in Skyway Airlines, and the incident involving Skyway employees and myself 10 days ago. While these issues intersect, they each require specific attention." Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Taylor, we want to start by extending our sincere apologies for your experience. After reviewing the evidence, we acknowledge that our staff did not handle the situation appropriately. This acknowledgement is a start, Mr. Daniels," Jasmine replied. "But apologies without accountability or change are merely words." Patricia Morrison, Skyway's legal counsel, interjected. "We've prepared a comprehensive settlement offer that we believe addresses the incident fairly." She slid a document across the table. "In addition to monetary compensation, we're proposing a review of our training procedures and the implementation of sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff." Jasmine glanced at the document without reaching for it. $250,000, non-disclosure agreement, and vague promises of review and training. "Is that your definition of comprehensive, Ms. Morrison?" "It's significantly above standard settlements for customer service incidents," Morrison replied stiffly. "This was not a customer service incident," Jasmine stated firmly. "This was a physical assault resulting from racial profiling, documented on video and witnessed by a plane full of passengers. But more importantly, it's indicative of systemic issues within your corporate culture that represent material risks to any potential investor." She opened her portfolio and distributed copies of a different document to everyone at the table. "These are Harrington Capital's conditions for proceeding with the investment." Frank Daniels scanned the document, his expression darkening as he read through the extensive list of required changes. "This is unprecedented," he finally said. "You're asking for a complete overhaul of our corporate governance structure. We're asking for necessary improvements to address documented deficiencies," Jasmine corrected. "Let me walk you through the key points." Over the next 30 minutes, she methodically outlined Harrington's requirements. The creation of a Chief Diversity Officer position reporting directly to the CEO, mandatory diversity targets for executive leadership and board composition, comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees with specific emphasis on customer-facing staff, transparent reporting of discrimination incidents and their resolutions, and a $50 million commitment to community initiatives supporting educational opportunities for underrepresented minorities. Additionally, Jasmine continued, "We require accountability for the specific individuals involved in my incident. Not termination, that's too easy and doesn't solve the underlying problems, but a transparent process of review, retraining, and appropriate consequences." Frank Daniels shook his head. "While we appreciate Harrington's interest in our company, these demands would impose extraordinary costs and operational challenges. The financial impact would be substantial." Walter Hayes, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. "Actually, Frank, we've done a thorough financial analysis of these proposed changes." He distributed another document containing detailed projections. "When factoring in reduced legal liability, improved employee retention, enhanced brand reputation, and expanded customer base, these initiatives represent a net positive ROI within 3 years." "That's assuming your projections are accurate," Frank countered. Our projections are based on comparative analysis of companies that have implemented similar initiatives, Walter replied. The data is quite compelling. Frank exchanged glances with his team before responding. Even if we accepted your financial analysis, these changes would represent a fundamental shift in how we operate. Our shareholders, your shareholders have already seen a 15% decline in stock value since the incident, Jasmine interrupted. They're watching hundreds of millions in market capitalization evaporate because of your handling of this situation. I suspect they'd be quite interested in solutions that reverse that trend. We need time to consider these proposals, Patricia Morrison stated. Of course, Jasmine agreed. However, I should mention that Harrington Capital has already had preliminary discussions with both Aero Global and Transcontinental Airlines regarding potential investments similar to what we were considering with Skyway. Frank Daniels stiffened visibly. Aero Global and Transcontinental were Skyway's two largest competitors. The implication was clear: if Skyway didn't accept Harrington's terms, the capital, and the competitive advantage it would provide, would go to their rivals instead. How long do we have to respond? Frank asked, his voice tightly controlled. 48 hours, Jasmine replied. We understand this requires careful consideration, but market conditions and our investment timeline don't allow for extended deliberation. After the Skyway team departed, Walter turned to Jasmine with a mix of admiration and concern. You didn't leave them much room to maneuver, he observed. They don't deserve room to maneuver, Jasmine replied. What they did, what their corporate culture enabled, isn't something that should be negotiable. And if they walk away? Jasmine gathered her documents. Then we invest in their competitors and watch Skyway continue to lose market share until they either change or fail. Either way, the industry learns an important lesson about the true cost of discrimination. The 48 hours that followed were tense. Behind the scenes, Jasmine learned through her network that Skyway's board was deeply divided on how to respond. Frank Daniels was advocating for minimal compliance, accepting some of Harrington's less costly demands while negotiating down the more substantial changes. Other board members, alarmed by the continuing stock slide and negative publicity, pushed for embracing the proposals in full. As the deadline approached with no response from Skyway, Jasmine finalized the alternative investment strategy with Aero Global, whose CEO had eagerly embraced not only Harrington's capital but also their proposed diversity initiatives. A carefully placed leak to a financial news outlet about the potential billion-dollar deal falling through sent Skyway's stock tumbling another 5% in after-hours trading. With just 2 hours remaining before Harrington's deadline expired, Jasmine's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Ms. Taylor, came a woman's voice she didn't recognize. This is Diane Foster, Skyway Airlines board member. I'm calling regarding your investment proposal. Ms. Foster, Jasmine acknowledged, surprised. Diane Foster wasn't one of the board members who had attended the meeting. The board has just concluded an emergency session, Foster continued. I've been authorized to inform you that Frank Daniels is no longer the CEO of Skyway Airlines, effective immediately. Jasmine paused, processing this unexpected development. I see. And who will be taking his place? On an interim basis, I will, Foster replied. The board felt we needed new leadership to address the current challenges appropriately. A quick internet search as they spoke revealed what Jasmine hadn't known. Diane Foster was one of only 2 women on Skyway's board, and the only black person in the company's senior leadership. She had previously served as their chief operating officer but had been notably absent from major company decisions despite her extensive experience. Congratulations on your appointment, Ms. Foster, Jasmine said. May I ask what this means for Harrington's proposal? That's why I'm calling, Foster replied. I'd like to meet with you personally tomorrow morning to discuss a path forward that addresses the concerns you've raised. I believe we can find common ground that serves both our company's interests while creating meaningful change. As she ended the call, Jasmine felt a cautious optimism. The removal of Frank Daniel suggested that at least some faction of Skyway's leadership recognized the need for significant change. Whether this represented a genuine commitment to transformation or merely a strategic pivot to salvage the investment deal remained to be seen. What was clear, however, was that the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. A black woman now sat on both sides of the negotiating table, each wielding significant influence over the future of a major American corporation. Whatever happened next would send ripples throughout the industry, and potentially beyond. The Skyway Airlines boardroom couldn't have presented a more stark contrast to Harrington Capital's. Where Harrington's space projected quiet confidence through understated elegance, Skyway's boardroom screamed corporate excess, oversized leather chairs, ostentatious wood paneling, and a grandiose oil painting of the company's founder dominated one wall. It was the kind of room designed to intimidate through sheer opulence rather than substance. But today, the atmosphere in this space was anything but triumphant. 12 board members sat around the massive table, tension evident in their postures and expressions as interim CEO Diane Foster presented the options before them. "We have 23 hours remaining to respond to Harrington Capital's conditions," Foster reminded them, her voice steady but urgent. "Our stock has dropped nearly 20% since the incident. Major corporate clients are suspending their contracts. The financial impact is already severe and worsening by the day." Gregory Pearson, the board's longest-serving member, shook his head in frustration. "This entire situation has been mishandled from the start. Frank should have immediately taken responsibility instead of trying to dismiss it as a misunderstanding." "That's easy to say in hindsight," countered Richard Brentwood, who had been Frank Daniel's strongest ally on the board. "Frank was trying to protect the company from liability. These demands from Harrington are extraordinary. They're essentially asking for control over our internal operations in exchange for their investment." "They're asking for accountability and improvement," Diane corrected. "And given the circumstances, their demands are not unreasonable." "Not unreasonable?" Brentwood scoffed. "A $50 million community investment fund? Mandatory diversity quotas for executive positions? These are social engineering projects, not business decisions." Diane fixed him with a level gaze. "Richard, the data Harrington provided demonstrating the financial benefits of diverse leadership isn't social engineering, it's sound business strategy backed by extensive research. Companies with diverse executive teams outperform their peers by 36% in profitability." "Even if we accept that premise," another board member interjected, "the timeline they're demanding is aggressive. Implementing these changes would be disruptive." "More disruptive than losing $1 billion investment and watching it go to our competitors instead?" Diane challenged. "More disruptive than continuing to hemorrhage market value and customer confidence?" The debate continued for hours, with the board fundamentally divided. Some members, particularly those with backgrounds in other industries where diversity initiatives had proven successful, supported accepting Harrington's conditions in full. Others, primarily the old guard who had been with the airline for decades, resisted what they perceived as outside interference in their operations. As the discussion circled without resolution, Diane finally stood, commanding the room's attention. "Let me be clear about our situation," she stated firmly. "I've spent the morning reviewing our financial projections if we lose the Harrington investment. The outlook is bleak. We'd be forced to delay our fleet modernization program, giving Aero Global and Transcontinental a significant competitive advantage. Our expansion into Asian markets would be postponed indefinitely. And we'd likely face a shareholder revolt at the next annual meeting." She distributed a document containing these projections, allowing a moment for the gravity of the situation to sink in. "Furthermore," she continued, "our legal team estimates potential liability from Ms. Taylor's case, particularly with the video evidence, could exceed 8 figures, especially if it goes to trial in a sympathetic jurisdiction. And that doesn't account for the ongoing brand damage and customer attrition." Richard Brentwood, still resistant, offered a compromise. "What if we agree to some of their demands, the less costly ones, and negotiate on the others?" Surely Harrington would rather get part of what they want than nothing at all. Diane shook her head. Based on my conversation with Ms. Taylor, I don't believe they're bluffing about their willingness to walk away. They've already had substantive discussions with our competitors. As if to punctuate her point, Diane's assistant entered the room and discreetly handed her a tablet. After reading the screen, Diane looked up at the board. Bloomberg is reporting that Harrington Capital is in advanced negotiations with Aero Global for a potential strategic investment. Their stock is up 7% on the news. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Gregory Pearson spoke up. I move that we accept Harrington Capital's conditions in full and authorize Diane to finalize the agreement on the company's behalf. The subsequent vote was 9 in favor, 3 opposed. With the board's authorization secured, Diane immediately called Jasmine to request a meeting that afternoon. As she ended the call, she reflected on the irony of the situation. For years, she had advocated for many of the same changes Harrington was now demanding, only to be sidelined and ignored by Frank Daniels and his allies. It had taken an external crisis and the threat of financial catastrophe to create the opening for transformation she had long envisioned. Meanwhile, at Harrington Capital, Jasmine was concluding her parallel negotiations with Aero Global. The competing airline had eagerly embraced not only Harrington's capital but also their proposed diversity initiatives, seeing an opportunity to position themselves as the progressive alternative to Skyway. We should have everything finalized by tomorrow morning, Jasmine informed Aero Global's CEO. Unless something unexpected develops with Skyway. When her assistant informed her of Diane Foster's call requesting an urgent meeting, Jasmine was intrigued but cautious. The removal of Frank Daniels suggested a potential shift in Skyway's approach, but whether it represented genuine commitment to change or merely a cosmetic leadership shuffle remained to be seen. That afternoon, Diane arrived at Harrington Capital alone, a departure from the standard corporate practice of bringing an entourage of lawyers and executives to such high-stakes negotiations. It was a deliberate choice that signaled both confidence and a desire for authentic conversation. Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Taylor, Diane began once they were seated in a conference room. Please, call me Jasmine. Jasmine, Diane nodded. I want to start by offering you a personal apology, not just a corporate one. What happened to you was inexcusable, and as a leader at Skyway, even though I wasn't directly involved in the incident, I bear some responsibility for the culture that allowed it to occur. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and Jasmine felt a shift in the dynamic between them, from adversaries to potential allies united by a common understanding of the challenges Black women faced in corporate America. I appreciate that, Diane. And I want to be clear that this isn't about punishment or retribution. It's about creating meaningful change that ensures no one else experiences what I did. I understand completely, Diane replied. And that's why I'm here to tell you that Skyway's board has voted to accept all of Harrington's conditions without amendment or negotiation. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by the unequivocal acceptance. All of them? Including the Community Investment Fund and the executive diversity requirements? All of them, Diane confirmed. The board has authorized me to execute the agreement immediately and begin implementation of the required changes. That's unexpected, Jasmine admitted. What changed their minds? Diane smiled wryly. A combination of financial reality and, frankly, fear. Your strategy of creating a credible alternative with our competitors was particularly effective. No one wanted to explain to shareholders why we lost $1 billion investment to Aero Global. And you? Jasmine asked. What's your personal stake in this? Diane considered the question thoughtfully before responding. I've been with Skyway for 15 years, working my way up from regional operations to the C-suite. Throughout that journey, I've pushed for many of the same changes you're now requiring, only to be consistently sidelined or ignored. This crisis has created an opportunity to finally implement what I've long believed is necessary, not just for ethical reasons, but for the company's long-term success. The conversation that followed was remarkably candid, with both women sharing their experiences navigating predominantly white male corporate environments and the strategies they developed to overcome barriers. What had begun as a high-stakes negotiation evolved into a discussion between two leaders with a shared vision for how business could, and should, operate more inclusively. By the end of their meeting, they had not only agreed on the investment terms but had begun mapping out the implementation plan for Skyway's transformation. Diane would remain as permanent CEO rather than interim, with the board's unanimous support. The Chief Diversity Officer position would be established immediately, reporting directly to her. And most significantly, the employees involved in Jasmine's incident would participate in a restorative justice process rather than simply being terminated, addressing the systemic issues rather than just removing individuals. As Diane prepared to leave, she paused. "There's one more thing you should know. The flight attendant, Heather Miller, sent a letter to the board yesterday. After watching your interview and seeing the public response, she's had something of a reckoning. She's acknowledged her role in what happened and expressed interest in being part of the solution rather than just a scapegoat." Jasmine absorbed this information with measured optimism. Real change requires both institutional transformation and individual accountability. "I'd be interested in speaking with her as part of the restorative process." "I'll arrange it," Diane promised. That evening, as news of the agreement between Harrington Capital and Skyway Airlines broke across financial media, Jasmine called Walter Hayes to share the details. "You've accomplished something remarkable here," Walter told her. "Not just securing the investment on our terms, but potentially transforming an entire industry's approach to these issues." "It's just the beginning," Jasmine replied. "The real work starts now." Indeed, as she reviewed the final agreement documents that night, Jasmine recognized that this moment represented not just a personal or professional victory, but the leveraging of financial power to create structural change, a power move that could ripple far beyond a single company or incident. What had begun with her being powerless and bloodied on an airport floor was culminating in a fundamental shift in how a major American corporation approached diversity, equity, and inclusion. The symmetry wasn't lost on her as she signed the final documents, her once bruised wrists now steady as she wielded the pen that would reshape an industry. 1 month later, Jasmine stood at a podium in Skyway Airlines corporate headquarters, the Manhattan skyline visible through the windows behind her. Beside her stood Diane Foster, now the permanent CEO, looking confident in a tailored burgundy suit that subtly conveyed both authority and a departure from the company's previous leadership style. Camera flashes punctuated the room as journalists documented this unprecedented moment. A joint press conference announcing not just Harrington Capital's billion-dollar investment in Skyway, but the airline's comprehensive new initiative for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today marks a new chapter not just for Skyway Airlines, but potentially for corporate America, Jasmine began, her voice steady and clear. What began as a deeply painful personal experience has evolved into an opportunity for meaningful transformation. The audience, composed of journalists, industry analysts, Skyway employees, and representatives from various civil rights organizations, listened with rapt attention as Jasmine outlined the key components of the agreement: the newly created position of Chief Diversity Officer, already filled by Dr. James Washington, a respected academic with extensive experience in organizational change. The $50 million community investment fund focused on educational opportunities for underrepresented minorities, the transparent reporting system for discrimination incidents, and the comprehensive anti-bias training program being developed for all employees. These changes aren't just about preventing incidents like the one I experienced, Jasmine emphasized. They're about creating a corporate culture where such incidents are unthinkable. Where diversity is recognized as a strength and inclusion is embedded in every aspect of operations. When she concluded her remarks, Diane stepped forward to detail Skyway's implementation plan and timeline. But perhaps most significant was her announcement regarding the specific individuals involved in Jasmine's incident. Accountability is essential to genuine change, Diane stated firmly. The employees directly involved in Ms. Taylor's mistreatment have participated in a thorough review process. Rather than simply terminating their employment, which would address symptoms rather than causes, we've established a restorative justice approach. She explained that Heather Miller, the flight attendant who had initially questioned Jasmine's presence in first class, had undergone extensive anti-bias training and was now participating in the development of new customer service protocols specifically designed to prevent racial profiling. Captain Andrew Reynolds had been suspended without pay for 2 months and would return in a mentorship role focused on decision-making under pressure. The security personnel had been reassigned to non-customer-facing positions pending completion of comprehensive retraining. We believe that transformed individuals within a transformed system create sustainable change, Diane concluded. And we're committed to measuring and reporting our progress transparently. The press conference concluded with the formal signing of the investment agreement, cameras capturing the moment as Jasmine and Diane shook hands. 2 black women solidifying a partnership that would reshape a major American corporation and potentially influence an entire industry. As journalists dispersed and the formal event concluded, Jasmine found herself in a quiet moment with Walter Hayes, who had watched the proceedings with evident pride. "This is the kind of leadership I always knew you were capable of," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "Using power not just to make money, but to create meaningful change." Jasmine smiled, touched by his sentiment but also reflective. "I keep thinking about that moment on the plane, Walter. How powerless I felt being dragged down that aisle. And how many people experience that kind of powerlessness every day without the platform or resources to fight back." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Which is why what you've done here matters so much. It's not just about one company or one incident." Their conversation was interrupted by an aide informing Jasmine that her car was ready. She had promised Zoe she would be home in time for dinner after the press conference, a promise she was determined to keep despite the momentous events of the day. In the car, Jasmine's mind drifted back to a conversation she'd had with her daughter 3 weeks earlier, after Zoe had seen news coverage of the incident despite Jasmine's efforts to shield her from it. "Were you scared, Mommy?" Zoe had asked, her young face serious as she processed the images of her mother being dragged from the plane. "Yes," Jasmine had answered honestly. "I was scared, and I was hurt, and I was angry." "Then why didn't you just take the money they offered and forget about it?" "My friend Emma's dad said that's what he would have done." It was a perceptive question that cut to the heart of the matter, and Jasmine had taken a moment to formulate her response carefully. "Because sometimes standing up against something wrong is more important than taking the easy way out," she had explained. "And because I'm in a position to make changes that help not just me, but lots of other people too. With great power comes great responsibility." Zoe had grinned at the familiar Spider-Man reference before growing serious again. "I'm proud of you for standing up, Mommy." That simple statement from her daughter had meant more to Jasmine than all the media coverage and corporate victories combined. 2 days after the press conference, Harrington Capital announced Jasmine's promotion to CEO, with Walter Hayes transitioning to an advisory role. The appointment made headlines as yet another barrier-breaking moment, but to Jasmine, it represented the natural progression of a journey that had begun long before the incident on Flight 2237. The ripple effects throughout the industry were swift and significant. Within 3 months, 2 other major airlines announced their own diversity and inclusion initiatives, clearly influenced by Skyway's program. Corporate clients began including questions about diversity policies in their RFPs for travel contracts. And perhaps most significantly, the Department of Transportation launched a comprehensive review of anti-discrimination practices across all U.S. airlines. 6 months later, Jasmine found herself on another Skyway flight, this time with Zoe accompanying her on a business trip combined with a short vacation. As they settled into their first-class seats, Jasmine noticed how differently the flight attendants interacted with her, not with the exaggerated deference of people afraid of another incident, but with the natural respect and professionalism that should have been standard all along. Ms. Taylor, it's an honor to have you on board, the lead flight attendant said quietly as she checked their seatbelts. The changes you helped implement have made this a better place to work for all of us. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Zoe looked out the window with excitement while Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as a traumatic experience had transformed into a catalyst for change that extended far beyond one company or one incident. She thought about Heather Miller, who had surprised everyone with her genuine commitment to growth after their initial restorative justice session. The woman who had once questioned Jasmine's right to a first-class seat was now helping lead Skyway's frontline training program, sharing her own journey from unconscious bias to awareness with disarming honesty. She thought about the coalition of black executives that had formed around her case and continued to meet quarterly, leveraging their collective influence to address systemic issues across industries. What had begun as an ad hoc response to a specific incident was evolving into an ongoing force for corporate accountability. And she thought about the hundreds of messages she'd received from people of color sharing their own experiences of discrimination in travel and expressing gratitude for her willingness to fight for systematic change rather than accepting a quiet settlement. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, Jasmine felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with victory over Skyway or professional advancement. It was the satisfaction of having transformed a moment of powerlessness into a movement for change, of having used her position of privilege to create space for others who lacked similar platforms. The true resolution wasn't in the settlement or the policies or even the cultural shift beginning to take root in the airline industry. It was in the recognition that individual courage, strategic thinking, and the willingness to stand firm could indeed bend the arc of corporate behavior toward justice. "Look, Mommy," Zoe whispered, pointing out the window as New York receded beneath them. "We're flying." Jasmine smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Yes, we are. Higher than ever before." Jasmine's story teaches us that true power lies not in wealth or position alone, but in how we use them to create meaningful change. When faced with injustice, we have choices: accept compensation and move on, or fight for systemic transformation. The easy path rarely leads to lasting impact. By refusing a quick settlement and leveraging her financial influence, Jasmine turned personal humiliation into industry-wide progress. Her story reminds us that accountability matters more than apologies, that diversity isn't just a moral imperative but a business advantage, and that corporate culture changes only when there are real consequences for failing to evolve. Perhaps most importantly, we learn that individual courage, when strategically applied, can transform systems that seem immovable. The most powerful response to discrimination isn't just personal resilience. It's using whatever privilege we have to create space for those without similar platforms or resources. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning a battle, but changing the rules of engagement entirely. Has discrimination ever touched your life or someone you care about? How did you respond? Comment below sharing your experience. Your story matters and could inspire others facing similar challenges. If Jasmine's refusal to accept the status quo resonated with you, hit that like button to help more people discover this powerful message. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage and transformation in the face of injustice. And please share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their power to make a difference, no matter how powerless they might feel in the moment. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, in a world where discrimination still exists, your voice, your choices, and your stand against injustice are more important than ever.